Radiant Guidance. Today's topic is stelliums in astrology. This is when 3 or more planets occupy the same sign in the same house, either in the sky or your natal birth chart, if you happen to have been born under one of these configurations. Now, the past 50 or so years, we've seen proportionally more stelliums than other moments in history. So I think it's also worthwhile to talk about what it means on a social collective level when such a concentration of planets occupy the same astrological sign. And I'm going to give some notable examples of people born with stelliums so you can better understand how to interpret it in a natal chart and see how it played out in the lives of some individuals. And I'm also going to talk about how astrological traditions really view a stellium and what they indicate on a more karmic level. So enjoy this video and hopefully you walk away with new insight. What does it mean if you have a stellium in your birth chart? So some consider most consider 3 planets to be a stellium. I would argue really 4 to be maybe a true stellium. And it does matter, are these planets outer planets or is a personal planet involved in the configuration? So how do you interpret it? It can be confusing. All these planets are expressing the same sign. The first thing I would look at is what planets are in the closest conjunction, meaning they have the tightest orb. So say you have 2 planets in the stellium and they're both at 5 degrees of Scorpio. That's going to be the 2 energies to really kind of dominate the configuration and perhaps hold the clue as to what's or how to channel these energies. Of course, you want to look at what house is the stellium occurring in. Is it in the first house where the focus is very much on the way that you're showing up in the world, your sense of who you are, your physical body even? Then the balance can be found in the opposite house, the 7th house of partnership, of relationships. And because stelliums can be such like an intense focus or a mission, it's really important to take into account the opposite house to find balance. Because often it's not a really balanced chart. But I think it's for good reason, because if you're born with a stellium, you're part of a mission here. So the example I'll give is those born 89 to 90 who have Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune all in Capricorn. They're part of a unique cohort because that triple conjunction has not happened since 1307 and 625 AD respectively. So that's a really rare super conjunction that occurs not very frequently. And I think the reason stelliums occur, one of my working theories is that it's times in history where immense change needs to happen. And as you guys probably know, we've been entering a new astrological age. And so there's like almost like we need all these people to be focused on this area. And with that triple conjunction, the focus, I believe, is Neptune dissolving old structures that are no longer working, Uranus visioning a new way, and Saturn creating the new form in which we can operate, perhaps better, more revised structures of how we can, templates of how we can live more in harmony with Earth. Because Capricorn, of course, is cardinal Earth energy. So you can think of a stellium as like an intense cardinal energy, right? Cardinal modality in astrology is that which wants to bring something new. It's a pioneer. It's on a mission. So if you're born with a stellium, you have a mission. And the clue lies definitely in the house, the element, and the sign. In Vedic astrology, they view stelliums to be something called a sanyasayoga. Now, a yoga is a special combination of planets, and the qualifiers for this particular sanyasayoga are actually quite strict. So it has to be 4 or more planets, personal planets, in your Vedic chart, right? Keep that in mind. Use your Vedic chart in the same house and the same sign. They can't be involving planets that are considered to be enemies according to traditional astrology. And it can also be in the 8th house. So it's a kind of rare configuration, but it's considered to be that of spiritual teachers or those who have achieved or can achieve moksha, which is liberation from the karmic cycle of death and rebirth. So it's a quite elevated yoga in Vedic astrology. And it's definitely represents someone who kind of stands outside the norm, meaning they've renounced some of the earthly pleasures, the more conventional ways of doing things. And a good example of this would be Osho. Osho was a spiritual teacher who had one of these in his Vedic chart, though it was in his 8th house. So he's an interesting example because I feel like he did have certain qualities of sanyasayoga, but it almost wasn't really a true sanyasayoga because if you followed his life, you know, he definitely gave into a lot of the material pleasures, owned a lot of cars, kind of got wrapped into the wealth and the fame and the notoriety. So I would not say he was living a life of renunciation, which is what this yoga is known for. So were you born under a stellium? Here's a snapshot of all the ages that stelliums occurred. So 1942 to 1944, you would have 3 to 6 planets in Gemini. 1946 to 1949, anywhere from 3 to 6 planets in Leo. If you're born in 1961 to 1969, you have anywhere from 3 to 6 planets in Virgo. From 1980 to 1983, anywhere from 3 to 6 planets in Libra. If you're born 1984 to 1995, you have anywhere from 3 to 6 planets in Scorpio. If you're born 1981 through 1984 or 1985 to 1988, you have 3 to 6 planets in Sagittarius. And finally, 1988 to 1990, you have 3 to 6 planets in Capricorn and had that super conjunction with the outer planets. So what happens if the sun sign is in the stellium? Or the moon sign for that matter, but particularly the sun sign. So the sun sign is very much our ego identity. So to me, this is a real signature of leadership because one's ego is so bound up in this mission that can sometimes include transpersonal collective planets. But it can be kind of difficult too because so much of the ego is almost like obsessed or driven by like achieving these other planetary goals or mission of that stellium. And so if that doesn't happen or if that feels like a failure, a lot of that person's ego can be really wrapped up into that. So you could say these are people here to carry out a mission, but there could also be immense pressure. But I think that's really true of any stellium with personal planets, that the person feels almost this drive, an obsession to achieve in this area of life. And like I said earlier, the balance can be found in the opposite house. So if your stellium is in the 10th house of work, career, vocation, that opposite 4th house where you root your home, your mental health, your mental well-being can ground you so that you can actually achieve that outer worldly success. But you need that home base to really nurture yourself because those other areas can sometimes be neglected. So let's go through some examples of well-known people with stelliums. So a lot of notable charts actually have stelliums because these are people that are so driven. And we'll see in these examples the double-edged sword of that drive and intense focus. So a great example is Billie Holiday. She was born with a Pisces stellium. Pisces being this very creative, artistic energy tuned into the collective in the 2nd house, which actually in an anatomical perspective represents the throat. And she was well known for her singing. And she really pioneered a very unique vocal style. And she was singing from a really young age. It's not uncommon to see people with stelliums who kind of like are immersed in it for most of their life. And when you have a concentration, right? Concentration and focus usually does lead to success because you are consistent and dedicated. And so we see that in her life. You know, she was a well-known singer, but we also know, like, if you study her personal life, that she had a drinking problem. So Pisces energy is very spiritual. You'll notice her stellium is a very true stellium. She's got 4 personal planets plus Chiron in Pisces in that 2nd house. But Pisces energy, if it's not channeled to a kind of higher devotion or connection to spirit or source, it's very often that people with a lot of Pisces can be overwhelmed by their sensitivity and not almost know how to handle it and use it to actually drown out or submerge themselves in substances, which is what happened actually. She had a really bad drinking problem. I think she had tried to heal it, but unfortunately she actually died from cirrhosis of the liver, which was from all the damage of drinking. So who knows if she drank actually because of the pressure to be, this well-known singer, and maybe that got to her, or if, it was just karmically part of she was working through those substance issues and wasn't able to find perhaps a higher outlet to get her away from the more destructive Pisces energies. So again, it's really important to bring balance into your life if you're born with a stellium so that you don't overdo it, right? That can be a big theme with stelliums. Stelliums are here to make their mark in the world, though, those born with them, like we see with Walt Disney. His stellium's in Capricorn, right? Capricorn stelliums, like many of you watching, can put a lot of pressure on themselves because Earth and Capricorn energy in particular is so results driven, so results oriented. They feel like they've got really big shoes to fill and they need a lot of recognition in the world, right? They have big, lofty aspirations because they want to make a mark. They want to be Capricorn 10th house recognized. So Walt Disney, he actually has a stellium in the 5th house, the house of children, the house of creative self-expression, art. And he was a very skilled artist from a young age. He knew from a young age that he wanted to pursue drawing, ended up doing animation and creating this empire really with his art. Now, it's interesting because we think of Disney as like children, play, all those 5th house things, but then the Saturn part of him really came out with behind the scenes. He was known to be a really strict, relentless critic, especially of his employees. So people would say if he said, that's okay, that'll work, that was actually seen as a very high compliment because I guess he could have said really mean things otherwise if he didn't like it. He's got, if you look in his stellium, a really tight conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, 1 degree conjunction. So I would say that's kind of like the highlight of the stellium, driving it all. Saturn and Jupiter is a very disciplined person, right? They can take their ideas and beliefs and put it into something really tangible and structured. So there's a combination of kind of luck and discipline when we have Saturn and Jupiter working together in a chart. And he had a good combination of both. So how would he have found balance with his stellium? It's in the 5th house, so the opposite house, the 11th house, groups, networks. Literally the networks that picked him up and wanted to show his movies and show his animations to the world. The social groups that he could have plugged into to actually not just be like someone drawing in their home, the isolated artist, but someone who's actually getting his stuff out into the world. And I think he had a pretty strict upbringing too. Like his parents kind of raised him in a pretty strict household. I think it might have been kind of religious, and he didn't necessarily have like a easy life. There was trials and tribulations of his life behind the scenes. And he wasn't necessarily like the happy character that he was portrayed to be, but he ultimately got a lot of success through this stellium. Next, we have Marie Curie, a pioneer in the world of science. And she was known for her pioneering research in radioactivity. Scorpio goes into the depths. It's the investigator. And what better qualities to have emphasized than someone who is a scientist exploring uncharted areas of science. She was the first woman to achieve 2 Nobel Prizes for her work. And interestingly, if we look at her chart, it's in the 11th house, a Uranian house. It's the house ruled by Uranus. And if you guys follow astrology, Uranus rules science and technology, anything new and cutting edge. And that's what she did. She pioneered a whole new branch of research that people hadn't done. And she was the first woman to really win recognition for this very male-dominated field. Interestingly, her 7th house, the house that represents our spouse, our partner, has Uranus in it. And it's interesting because her husband was also a scientist, also an innovator, someone that was her colleague of hers even. And I found that detail to be very interesting. We also note with her stellium, she's got the sun involved. Her life was really dedicated to her work, and it's conjunct the midheaven, the point of public recognition. And she's a very well-known figure within the world of science. She also ultimately kind of succumbed to the work, like took it, maybe you could argue, to an extreme, because she died due to health complications from being exposed to a lot of that toxic radioactive stuff that she was working with. So again, we see people so driven that they're almost like can neglect their health or other areas of life because they're so focused on this mission, right? It's great to have focus and drive, but if it's causing you to neglect other areas, that can be problematic, right? That can create imbalance. So I'm going to end with just talking about the stelliums, a little recap. Look at the house it's in. Look at the aspects happening. Look at if your personal planets are in that stellium, bound up with a lot of this collective transpersonal generational energy. And also note what the element is. So if it's a lot of water, like in this chart, there can be a lot of emotions that can take over. There can be over expression of emotion, overwhelming feeling, overwhelming sensitivity even. So a balance to that would be earth. Grounding into the earth, having practices that connect you to the plants, to nature, to enjoying simple pleasures like food, not getting so lost in the emotional realm, but really rooting into earth and the field here. If you have your stellium in earth, like many of you with the Capricorn stellium, what's the balance? The balance would actually be water, right? Going with the flow or more, not needing to be so results driven, results oriented and practical, but allowing yourself to be in flow, allow yourself to feel, not just do what you feel like you have to do, but what's your true passion calling you? That would be something to look at. If you have a stellium in the fire signs, perhaps there's a lot of energy to do, to create, right? Fire is one of the most creative energies, insightful energies. But balance them would be maybe with air, right? Fire needs room to breathe. So connecting with others, being less into your passion and allowing yourself to just take a break to air it out, right? Too much fire actually burns itself out. What if your stellium is in air? There's a lot of energy that wants to move. There could be a lot of scattered energy. There could be a lot of things that want to be communicated, a lot of nervous energy. We can ground that into, I think, also earth by creating some structure, creating some rooted groundedness to balance all that energy that just wants to move and chatter or buzz, right? So that's one way you can look at your particular configuration. If this was useful, please click a like and subscribe to my channel. I'd love to hear from you, so comment below if you have a stellium in your birth chart. How has it played out for you? How do you work with your stellium? Love to hear examples. And if you need help understanding your natal birth chart, I also do one-to-one sessions. You can click the link to my website below. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day.